Hello and welcome to another Vinyl Voyage. Today I was thinking we'd talk a little bit about 8-tracks. What are they? Why did we have them? How do they work? And maybe we can even give some a listen. But they're kind of a weird little novelty from the 70s. They go back to the 60s and then disappeared in the early 80s. They're a little different. They look almost like an early video game cartridge or something, and they actually were used a little bit for that purpose briefly. But let's dig in a little bit. Hello and welcome back. I was thinking we'd talk a little bit about the mechanical structure of 8-tracks. They're about 5 inches by probably almost 4 inches across, around an inch thick. Now, the way these are structured, they're kind of similar to VHS or even cassette in that it utilizes magnetic tape. Let me see if I can pull some of this for you here. Now, this tape here is, let's see if I can draw a little bit out for you to show you here, without damaging it too much, right? These are old, very old. So, the tape here, if you can get a look at it, it's about 1/4 inch wide, and the way it works is it basically, there's a giant spool in here and it's on a continuous loop, and there's a head reader that picks up the magnetic signal. So what it is the iron is oriented a certain way, and then it can pick up the signal. They actually still use these for hard drives. For the internet is still all backed up on magnetic tape, believe it or not, or magnetic discs. So it's not actually as outdated as you might think, but for this format it is. But so the tape's 1/4 inch wide, and the spool turns at 3 3/4 inches per second. So it's running across this head reader at that speed. As far as the history of 8-tracks are concerned, they go back to the early 60s. There was a guy named Bill Lear. He had the Lear jet. You hear it referenced in Money by Pink Floyd. I think I'll buy me a Learjet. So anyway, that was a popular private jet that people could have, and he developed this tape to be able to be played on his jets, and also in collaboration with Ford and GM so that they could use it in their vehicles. It became sort of a factory option to have an 8-track player by the mid-60s, 66 I think was the year. The way they work, like I said, is it's magnetic tape, 1/4 inch thick, and it's called an 8-track because what it really is that there are 4 tracks, but each track has 2 channels to give you stereo sound. So you have the left and the right channel to get that stereo sound. So you've got, in a sense, there are 8 tracks running. The head reader at any given time is reading 2 of those 8. So it'll read the left and the right channel on 1 track, 2 track, 3 tracks. The way 8-track players work is, looks like we have somebody else who's interested in 8-tracks, I guess, today. But the way they work, and I'll show you when we play it, is there's 4 selectors. You can select the 4 different tracks. So these things, though, they were popularized in the mid-60s, which is interesting because they actually came along a little bit after the cassette. The cassette ended up replacing them ultimately. It's cheaper to make, but the way these work is they turn twice as fast as a cassette, so there should be, in theory, twice as much tape. Plus, all right, these things turn twice as fast as a cassette. Plus, the length of tape, because it's got about 10 minutes per track, that can be extended to 20, but you're going to have a pretty big spool at that point. But what you end up with is a much, much longer spool of tape inside here than you'd have in a cassette. We'll try to crack one open here in just a minute and maybe delve into it just a little bit more. Alright, so I was hoping to talk to you a little bit about how these things work. The best way to do that is to crack one open. Now, if you look very closely, you probably can't make them out, but there are little pins inside these drill holes. If you press them down, it releases snaps that hold the tape together. So we push down on one, open it, and Remember, this thing's over 50 years old, so it hasn't been opened in a long time. Let's see if I can do it gently here. You got to be careful because these are over 50 years old. But so this is basically what it looks like on the inside. Now, right here is your main spool that the tape, I got to be very careful here because you don't want it to unspool, but this is your main spool that the tape draws from and then retracts into. There's just one spool inside here, and the player's capstan engages here. Looks like we have another fan. So anyway, the player's capstan engages here, which turns this roller, which pulls the tape along. The head reader comes up here, and then it's basically a continuous loop. So what happens is that you can actually see the tape. As I turn this, the tape is just kind of feeding through. And it'll just turn and turn forever. Basically, it doesn't need to be. One advantage to cassettes is that these don't actually have to be flipped or anything like that. They're just on a continuous circuit. Now I'll show you a couple little areas where these things had problems. Now if you look here, the head reader had to press against the tape and have a good contact in order to be able to play properly. And so what you get was, what they did is they put a neoprene piece of rubber here as a backing. And that's nice for a little while, but you know, neoprene falls apart. It's not meant to last 50, 60 years, and so it just kind of dissolves and breaks down into this like dusty sort of mess. Here's the rest of it here. Let me try to fish it out here. So this was the rest of it. This piece of tape was supposed to be over the neoprene, and it just disintegrates over time, and that's what causes a lot of these tapes to not play. But the good news is that can actually be replaced. You just simply put a new piece of stripping in there and it should work just fine. Now I'm going to take this tape and see if I can put it back together here. You got to be a little bit gentle with these. Like I said, it's very old, but you see I got to have this piece mount into here. Much of these mountings are actually just to hold the tape in place properly. But so, one last sort of look here. Capstan pulls from here. Head reader presses against right here, and then there'd be a backing rubber there. That'll need to be replaced. The tape just kind of pulls along here. There's actually a little wheel in here that pinches the tape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the tape out of the way slightly to put this back together. Now these can be fixed, these can be repaired, but you got to be kind of gentle and careful with them. So I'm going to try to reassemble this as best I can here and try to line all the pieces up. Before I click it back together, I got to make sure the tape is in the right place. You want the tape to slide over the wheels, under there. All right, shall we hope for the best, click it back together, and simply hope for the best? All right, we're locked in. We're locked and loaded. Just got to make sure the wheel spins freely. And then I can just simply wind this back up without too much difficulty. Now this tape is a little bit old, and so it's not quite spinning as freely as it should. So I'll have to... Here we go. It needs just a little assistance, but you think, uh-oh, there's this extra tape here, but it actually self-winds. If it works correctly, Probably have to grease it just a little bit. This one's being a little difficult because it's so tight. The spool is a little bit tight. Let me see, give this one last try here. See if I can wind it back up. You get some tension on the tape, and the counter pressure should pull the other side in. Just got to get that wheel started. And there we go. I'll demonstrate that one more time for you. So these tapes, when the tape is out, how do you spool it back in? You just get a little bit of tension on it. It should, by pulling the wheel one way, it should yank the tape the other direction with the counter force. There we go. A little neat.